just at the position of the binding, but also in the flanking regions. So genome has been well prepared for the appropriate interactions in the process of evolution. So this encouraging result came from STAT3. Then we have now started try to look at what happens to other transcription factors. So we started looking at thousands of transcription factors, and this is the current data unpublished, where we looked at 1,300 transcription factors in human, and we found these are the kind of information spread out around them. So we have 4 clusters of them. So many of these transcription factors, actually we find that the motif position does not have much information. It is the flanking regions which enable this transcription factor possibly to bind. And then some of them have very sharp peak. That means the specificity of the binding of the transcription factor is very high, and therefore these flanking regions have no role. This then therefore, in order to search these targets, transcription factor will have to spend a lot of time. So this is the kind of discovery we make from purely data-driven analysis, from the data that has been collected by others being the parasites of that particular outcome. So I'll describe briefly one more project that we have done in the recent past, so that I can leave 15 minutes for questions. So the second project that we are trying to look at is what we call Jigyasa. Although it is Jigyasa, but we can pronounce it Jigyasa, which gives a lot of curiosity. And in this, what we are trying to do here is to integrate the sequence information with the gene expression information. The whole idea is this, that when we say this is my gene and this is my protein, and this is its functional annotation. So this functional annotation is context dependent. There is protein can be annotated to have a function, but this only tells about the possibility of that function, the potentiality of the function. It does not tell me about the eventuality of that function. So the eventuality of the actual function does not depend on sequence and structure, because sequence and structure are all the same. In every cell, in every biological condition, this protein is there. This is part of the genome, and that it performs certain function in some context and certain other function in another context. So with this aim, so can we integrate the information that comes from the expression environment of a cell? Because the actual cellular context is better encoded in the expression environment or the expression profiles. So if we integrate the sequence annotations with the expression environment, can we do better annotation? This is the goal of this project in a bigger context. And to begin with, again, we started looking at the DNA binding proteins. And the first thing we saw was to see whether the expression levels at the absolute expression levels of DNA binding coding genes is higher than the other genes. So we find that yes, it is higher than the others. But this is an artifact, because any gene which is already annotated and its function is known is likely to be highly expressed, because of the reverse reason, that people are able to annotate genes if their expressions are high. If the expressions are low, they are more difficult to annotate. Therefore, if I take any function, I will see a higher expression level. So this kind of differences, again, are not easily visible. We need to apply data science strategies here. How do we represent data if we because most of the genes are usually not expressed at all, and therefore whatever differences we observe may get occluded because of the abundance, frequent repetition of certain expression values. So that is where data science technologies will come. But to come to this point that the expression levels do they really represent the gene expression, the DNA binding function? Not necessarily. But if we look also at the co-expression level, we also see that the genes encoding for DNA binding genes coding functions have a higher co-expression levels with other genes. So what we found in this is that where does the gene expression play a role in the functional annotation? It plays a role. That is, we found that there are certain genes which are, when we predict them from sequence, we are unable to predict them as DNA binding proteins. But when we make their predictions with the help of gene expression profiles, global expression profiles, we were able to annotate them. So what it suggests that there are certain biological functions which are not very strongly encoded into sequences and structures. These functions become possible only under certain cellular contexts and cellular environments. When a favorable expression environment is available, when a favorable cofactor is available, the same sequence which earlier was having nothing to do with DNA will interact with the target genome and regulate this gene. So this is what, again, from purely data-driven And large data analysis can produce these kind of insights, which will not be very difficult to get from a purely experimental data. So then there are some models that we have done for the evolutionary profile based prediction of DNA binding proteins. I can't go into the details, all of them. So this is where if I take the evolutionary profile of a protein sequence, the evolutionary profile, because if there is a specific position and it has a specific function, then it cannot undergo any arbitrary mutation. So the specific positions where mutations take place, if the mutations are or the changes in a given positions are random, if they do not have an evolutionary profile, probably they are not related to a specific function. But if the mutant has a specific profile, it has a particular preference that it can, if arginine can only be replaced by say lysine, if this has a profile that a particular residue is always replaced by another residue, or there are preferences there. So if we are able to see those preferences, then these preferences are informative about the importance of that particular position for performing a specific function. How can computers make use or data science make use of this information? What are the challenges in doing it? The challenges is the first is to have annotated data for which or labeled data that we know that this is a protein which performs this function. These are the proteins which do not perform this function. Second is the problem of the encoding of or representation of the data. How do I represent my information for the purpose of computers? Third is the choice of model to avoid the overfitting, to avoid the lack of generalization of my model. And finally, the choice is also about the elimination of the redundancy. That is, many times the data I collect, I think I have a lot of data, but all my entries, all my objects in my data may be the same. So if I repeat the same alphabet many times, it does not increase the value of my data. So that is the data that has to increase in terms of information and in terms of the diversity of information. Not the repetition is not the abundance of data. That is what we have to bear in our mind. So additional problems that we are solving in our lab are trying to annotate the ECG signals and trying to develop an automated diagnostics for predicting whether so what we are trying to ultimately do is that people can take an ECG, they can upload this to our web servers, and or the web servers can automatically tell that this is the kind of anomaly that this ECG is reflecting. So this will be an additional diagnostics for people who have frequent concerns, and these can be integrated inside the software. Like now, many some companies have developed smart watches that can take your real-time ECG. So how can these ECGs require a real-time diagnosis? So how can we automatically diagnose them with the help of deep learning models? These are again all data-driven approaches. More data you have from patients and more data from the doctors, which is already a priori labeled, more accurate models we can develop. Okay, so I skipped this issue of deeper versus shallow learning. This is another type of problems we are looking. Then some patients undergo MRIs in hospitals, and sometimes there is an accident and the patient is unable to tell what are the problems that the person is facing, or when the patient is telling problems but we do not know the long-term prognosis and the issues that may be happening. So if we have an automated system where these images can be collected and an automated system can tell us that since this image, this MRI has a lesion at this location, this is the topology, this is the geometry of this lesion, can I tell that this person is going to have, say, linguistic deficiencies or a behavioral disorder or balancing issues when the person stands up? If we can know this diagnosis early on, we can intervene early, because even our ability to advance the diagnosis by a few days can significantly impact the outcomes of treatment. So these are some of the works that we have mentioned. I just now to summarize. So data science has always been fundamental to scientific analysis and discovery. That is the first point I made. The field has moved from statistical models to classical machine learning and now the deep learning models. But this is an issue I have not dealt with in this talk too much, but we often have a choice whether we should use a very complex model, a shallow deep learning machine learning model, or a deep learning model. it is not always that the deep model works better than shallow. Actually, in this particular paper that I just showed you in MRI images, we have extensively examined this issue, whether we should use deep learning or whether we should use standard learning methods. And under what conditions deep learning will outperform the classical machine learning method. That is what we have developed certain diagnostics for. So using this, we have to be careful about what model we use for finding answers for our biological data. And finally, I conclude with another poetic line that what machine learning does, mimicking brain, shallow and deep, machines learn while man is asleep. Without complex equations or laws, making use of errors and flaws, because error and flaws are what machine learning uses. It tries to minimize errors. Regressive, divisive, and classifying, these are the technical terms which are used in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Only in AI are sober defined. So with this, I stop. I hope.
Thank you, sir.
Good. I'll take some questions now if there are any.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative talk. Now, if you permit, I would like to go for questions raised by participants.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. They're a mixed bag: appreciation, hope from big data, and apprehension in a lighter way, and
Yeah,
some
please.
questions, sir.
Yeah, I'll take.
People have said you have drawn very wonderful correlation.
So I stopped sharing screen.
I think the near future. Sir, shall I read the questions?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Dr. Neelima Dhingra has asked, can I check the binding of synthetic molecule with DNA? Is it similar to the drug protein interaction or protein DNA binding? What is the need? What I need to extract from source? Kindly suggest.
So if you're talking about a data-driven approach, then what can be done in this case is take a lot of already bound drugs, database of them, and find some common features of the drug that you are trying to test. So this, as such, there is no such method directly available that you have a drug and you want to know whether it will bind genome or not. Some of my collaborators actually published one paper, I was not part of that, is to look at the DNA shape of the genome in the context of drugs. Because just the way the proteins recognize DNA shape in the genome, drugs also have a preference for certain shapes. But the problem is a little more challenging in the case of drugs because the drugs are much smaller, and modeling a very small binding sites in the genome requires then a much higher resolution model. But people have done some work in this direction.
Thank you, sir. The next question asked by Dr. Ranjana Arya. For the same set of data, is there possibility of interpreting in different ways and reaching different conclusion? How to prove which one is right, or the parameter are set to filter the information?
Yeah, definitely. This is usually the case when you are working with high dimensionality data. So there are two things. One is the high dimensionality and other is the large abundance of the data. If you have a lot of data and the dimensionality is small, then your models are more robust because there is a less likelihood of overfitting. But if you have very high dimension of data and the amount of data that you have is small compared to the dimensionality, you will always end up having overfitted model. Now, these overfitted model may be because this same data can be explained by multiple models, multiple set of parameters. It is like you have 2 points in 3-dimensional space, and I ask you to define a line, define a plane that can fit this line. So you can define multiple planes. So you can have line passing from this side in this orientation, this orientation. So if the amount of data is not large enough, there are many hypotheses, many alternative hypotheses which can completely explain your data. And so sometimes what the solutions for them are sometimes to not use the entire data for creating the model, use part of the data, and then cross-validate it. And even cross-validation techniques will not work if your data size is small. And then many times what people do is they take a model, they test it on the left out data, and they test again. So if you do multiple cycles, you effectively are training the data left out also. So the left out data should be tried only once after your model has been finished. So yes, it is always possible, and it is often the case that your data can be explained by multiple models, multiple set of parameters, and the way to prioritize them is to reduce the dimensionality of the data first, and try to create a model in which you have sufficient amount of instances. And when I say already touched upon during my talk, that a lot of data does not always is not guaranteed by just the simple increase the number of examples. They should also be sufficiently diverse, and they should also be sufficiently representative of the situations in which we want to use them later on.
Thanks, Professor Shandar. Just another
Thank you.
query.
Good to see you here.
Yeah, it was an excellent presentation, Professor Shandar, and we got to know a lot of things which we try to, as a biologist, we try to relate. My point here is like, for example, rare genetic disorders, we have not too many patients. Like whether if we have only 200 data set points, like 200 samples, that too from muscles, do you think that is sufficient to generate that dimension, high dimension data point to reveal any question? And also we need to then look for the clinical question that we want to ask and address, isn't it?
Yeah, so the trick here is, so rare disease is an important problem here, and the trick here is not to use everything that you know about the system into your model. To a priori represent your information in a reduced space. For instance, if you have, say, I don't know what features you're looking for in the rare disease. Let us say if you're looking at genes. So if you have 20,000 genes, don't work directly on creating a model with 20,000 genes. Reduce your data into, say, pathways or into your gene sets, which are fewer and which reduce the dimensionality of your model substantially. And if you have now formulated your problem with a smaller dimensions, number of dimensions, and your data 200 examples may be sufficient in that case. So
Okay.
trick here will be to first reduce the dimensionality of your problem.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. There is one question from Dr. Sarika Yadav. She is writing that you have said that transcription factor recognize the topological changes in the sugar phosphate backbone and not directly the bases. But there are only 4 type of bases and thus only 2 type of base pairing. So how the diversity of recognition by different transcription maintained in the cell, sir?
So yeah, there's at a single position, there are 4 possibilities. But if you look at the stretch of sequence, stretch of bases, so if there are 4 bases, they can have a large number of combinations. So it is not just a specific site that will be recognized. It will be a stretch of bases or sequence segment, which may be made up of 5 bases, 10 bases, 6 bases, any number of bases, depending on what is the size topology created or what is important in a given context. So yes, the diversity comes from not a single position, but a large number of base positions, one after the other. And stacking patterns that when one base pair stacks on the other base pair. So for instance, if you have just GC only, so GC, when it stacks on GC, and when GC stacks on CG, they form different structures. And same way, if you have multiple, all the G are on one side, all the C are on the other side, and when GC are distributed randomly on both sides, they form different topologies. And they give rise to different level of stability, even though both of them are GC. So diversity comes from the overall distribution of bases within the sequence.
Dr. Shandar, it was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much. I just have one question. We always talk about reducing the dimensionality. What I have actually experienced in my case when I was looking at metagenomic analysis, we used a principal component analysis. Slowly, I realized that people are using t-SNE plots. As I actually see number of papers, I see different methods being used by different people. So I sometimes get confused, which way I should be actually going, because there are so many different algorithm people have been using it. So anything which we should know which way we should follow further, I mean, sometimes very difficult. So any thought about how to minimize the dimensionality of the data and which way we should actually be going?
Yeah, so quickly, so yeah, dimensional reduction is a full-fledged subject in the field of computer science. So quick thoughts are, first of all, there are two approaches to reduce dimensions. One is simply select the dimensions which are important to you. The feature selection approach, simply discard some of the dimensions which you think are not very useful. So you can just take the most variant example cases, for example, of the features. Second is the transformative approach, like in the case of principal component, you transform your space from one space to other. Now, all of these transformation-based approach have limitation. Like PCA has a limitation because it can only produce a linear transformation. So if the dependence between feature is of a linear nature, then PCA works very well. But I give you an example. If you have, say, 3 points and which are written in three-dimensional space, and if these 3 points are all in a straight line, so you do not really need 3 dimensions to represent these 3 points. You just need 1 dimension. Okay, so this is the way to reduce dimension, and PCA will be very effective in reducing dimension of this kind. It can find out that you have 3 points are in a straight line, and your data is not 3-dimensional. Your first principal component will have 100% variance in this case. But there are more complex geometries. So for instance, these 3 points may not be along a straight line. These 3 points may be along a circle. Now, these 3 points have 1 dimension effectively, but PCA cannot find that axis which puts these 3 points in one dimension. So PCA will have a limitation in this case and cannot model this kind of dimensionality. So the data has inherent low dimensional representation, but PCA is unable to discover it. So you have to find alternatives. So some of this curvilinearity can be captured by other techniques like B-spline and all. But then people have sometimes this geometrical representation is not effective, and we cannot really interpret this geometrically. So there are more advanced methods like genetic algorithms and other methods for feature selection. And sometimes now some of the deep learning models internally do it. Internally find a space which represents, so like autoencoder has become a technique where if you have sufficient data, you try to find a lower dimensional representation with the help of an autoencoder. That is, you have a lot of input features and you have a smaller hidden layer, and then you have output. So try to find a reduced representation which can reproduce the original representation in some way. So just coding and decoding. So if your data can be coded into X features and these X features can decode it and give me back the original dimensionality, then these X features are good enough. So, but then how to find these X features? So that is the neural networks and the autoencoding features work very effectively there. So deep learning models internally try to take advantage of this.
Looks like a data scientist now. It's an integral part of whatever science we do. It's not like that you convey this to me and I am able to do that.
Yeah, we have to keep a pace with these things.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question. The Mahinder ji has asked, please suggest the computer configuration which need to use for analysis of such huge data.
Computer configuration.
Yes.
Okay, so I can direct some vendors who can give you excellent configurations. So well, it is not. I think it is difficult to answer this because the computations are also not homogeneous. Not everybody is not doing the same kind of computations. So some are doing memory intensive computations. Some are doing, say, CPU intensive computations. In some cases, they are doing GPU based programming. So it is not. I don't think there is a single answer to this. The configuration will depend on what kind of programs you will run.
I guess what he means is that no consultation fees means no clear answer. Okay, Dr. Arun, if you allow, can I ask a question? Okay, so Professor Chandra, I have two questions. One is regarding when you are trying to develop this AI-mediated diagnostic tools. I'm just wondering about the ethical concerns, because what if a person is diagnosed wrongly, then the responsibility does not lie with the person who has actually developed the tool, because you can say this is AI mediated. So I just developed the tool and there is no doctor who is actually monitoring it. So how do you think the ethics will come into play, this kind of things?
No, that's an important question, but all the AI-based techniques are not a substitute for human expertise. They are an aid to the human expertise. So like you have self-driving cars. So people are not working on really a driverless car. But what people are working on is a car which is aided by such devices, so that the task of driver is reduced. So most of these diagnostic things are also, they create an alert system. They do not create a substitute for the diagnostics. So if, I mean, for instance, if one system I was working on was the prenatal diagnostics for the anomalies in the fetus. So if the computational diagnostics gives and says, okay, this fetus has some problems, based on this, one cannot go for a decision for termination of pregnancy. This has to, this is just an alert. And before a decision is taken, then a proper second level of diagnosis, which is more accurate, which is more direct, has to be performed. So no automated diagnostics will take medical decisions for us. They only aid the experts.
Right. So yeah, that is just like you always have a warning on cigarettes also, that it is not. So you might have a warning, but I'm just thinking in an academician perspective that if you develop a tool and you put it out there, and although you put a warning that without doctor's consent, this is just a hint, but then still, if there are people who are going to just go ahead. So
no, warning does not mean this. Warning means basically you want to screen an entire population. So for instance, in many countries, there certain cancer screening tests are compulsory. For when you cross this age, you have to go for the screening for this particular cancer. So the cost of screening every individual is very high. So can there be alternative methods which can filter out low risk individuals from high risk individuals? So it will not work. I mean, it will not completely eliminate cases which apparently from the computational diagnostics, they are said to be safe, but they're not safe. And same for the people who have been alerted for a particular potential problem, but they may not have that problem. So yes, so we should not think of AI-based diagnostics or AI-based any of these technologies to be a substitute for human expertise. They are used for screening purpose, just like you do drug design. So you do a screening using in silico approaches. It does not mean that the drugs which have not been selected in the screen and they did not finally get into the clinical trials, there may be some drugs still left out in the first stage because they did not qualify from the screening point of view. So we are not there yet, but if we were to test every drug, or if we were to test every individual in the population, the cost is much higher. So the only effort here is to reduce the human involvement and to reduce the cost of. Sometimes you do not have enough experts. Even doctors want to have help. I don't want to read every X-ray. I want to first these X-ray to go through the automated diagnostics, and then I will only look at the top 10 X-rays or top 20 X-rays a day. So that is where these are critical, and this is, I think I answered your
yes.
question.
And my second question is more out of ignorance. Maybe I missed that point. That you mentioned that you had analyzed structural conformations of DNAs in different cell types and then identified transcription factor binding frequencies. What was the data that was used as an input for this kind of analysis?
So I think one data that I showed you on STAT3 was a set of ChIP-seq experiments that researchers have already published in independent studies. And one of them was based on the DNA-seq food printing data. So when we looked at the large number of transcription factors, we were using DNA-seq experimental data. And when we were looking at the STAT3 target cell type based information, we were looking at the ChIP-seq data.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is one last question pending here regarding the GEO dataset, GEO dataset. Asking about the tool, how to access the meaningful interpretation to correlate it with our problems, sir.
So GEO data itself, you can only search samples. It is not for analysis. This does not provide you analysis. The GEO currently provides you just this list of experiments that people have done. So you have to download the data and do your own analysis. And there are some tools for doing that. And we in our lab are creating metadata from GEO, where we have combined large number of platforms and unified them. And we are developing some NLP based techniques to access and perhaps analyze this data. But this is, even that will not provide you a direct analysis. You have to collect, all that will provide you is to collect the data related to your problem. And then you have to download, and this data itself may not be ready for direct analysis because each of these profiles have been collected under different conditions, and the quantifications are different. So to analyze them uniformly, you need to pre-process them, which is a long step. So we in our lab are trying to develop this data where the pre-processing will not be required, where the data sets are unified already. And in some cases, like in some platforms, some genes may be missing, some platforms have more probes, some has less probes. So we are trying to fill those and trying to predict the missing genes in some of the platforms. So this will provide you a comprehensive resource that should be available in a matter of months. But that also will provide you basically give you a list of samples which are pre-processed. And then further analysis we'll have to do using additional tools, other tools.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for diverse information, knowledge on big data and machine science. It's my privilege to offer vote of thanks on this occasion, and grateful for such a wonderful talk with wide range of coverage of topic. We all are inspired by your great words and knowledge shared. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm usually not so punctual, and I'm really impressed with myself. I finished it perfect on time.
Yeah, he surprised me too. So Professor Shandar is from the same department I am, and he is the outgoing dean. And yeah, we often
outgone dean.
Yeah, I'm one of the ones who had always had complaints of him having late, but I'm very happy that he made it very much on time, and we are actually very thankful. And in fact, I must tell you that there are several participants who privately sent me messages thanking to have you as a speaker because they enjoyed your talk so much. So I'm happy to pass that message on to you that a lot of participants have enjoyed your talk, and we are very glad that we could have you here. And
thank you, Rita ma'am. Really, I would